Hey guys, Katie here from Equestrian Movement, and I'm popping into the group for training for today. I wanted to talk about some of the things we've been working on in the school. We've just started introducing the communication buttons for the junior show team and our equestrian mastery students. I'm just going to double check that this is playing properly. It's Katie here from Equestrian Movement. Shh, Katie. All right. So we have introduced the communication buttons to our junior show team and our equestrian mastery team on the Fridays. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about where we're at, how we're using it, and what we're doing, and some of the fun hiccups, I guess, that we've had with using it. So I'll start this one out. I've been using the communication buttons with Fiddy. So if you don't know what the communication buttons are, they're the buttons that you push them and you record a word into it, and they say the word when you push it. So I had the two out for Fiddy as stop and ready, and that was really good for the work that we were doing together, because Fiddy can get really escalates in frustration really quickly when he doesn't know what the right answer is. So I was able to give him a little bit of space and allow him to say stop when he started to get frustrated, rather than it escalating as a behavior and him getting stroppy with me. So with Fiddy, I would ask him something, he would do it, and then I would go over to the button and I would say stop. And so when we did stop, there was no treat or reward for pressing the stop or for stopping. We did a lot of connection work. So Fiddy likes to lick me to self-regulate emotionally and to bring his stress levels down. And he also will put his tongue in my hand so that I pull his tongue, and he'll pull his tongue out of my hand. And then once he's kind of self-soothed a little bit, then he would press the ready button and we would go into a couple of treat earning tricks, and then he could come back down and stop training as he needed, if he needed to self-regulate and bring his emotional response to his frustration to learning, bring it back under control before he went back out and tried again. That worked really, really well for me and Fiddy. It just really suited Fiddy's temperament to have that control over, being asked things of him. It worked really well with his mounting frustration, and definitely got a deeper connection. And it really I was able to pick up on some body language that I was missing before I used the button. So where we were kind of at initially was he'd get frustrated, I get frustrated, so he'd get more frustrated, so I get more frustrated, and then we just get grumpy at each other and finish the training session. That would have been about 2 years ago now, but we had found a way of working together, and this really just enhanced it even more. So I was able to pick up some body language cues that were happening that I was missing, which is so normal and so common, especially when we're getting into the nitty gritty with our horses, is that there's a lot of stuff that they will communicate through their body before we even notice it. We're seeing the escalated version of their emotions, but by the time it gets to become a behavioral issue. So that worked really well with me being able to take pressure off when he needed me to, and then him being able to tell me he was ready to go back and do some more work, which just worked so perfectly for his temperament and the way that he works, because pressure always escalates him towards more of aggressive behaviors. So finding different ways of interacting with his nature so that we could keep the quality of the relationship and the connection there. So with the horses at the school, I have started with the buttons to hug, or like for hugs or scratches. I chose those because I didn't want it to be anything too complicated for the students or for the horses initially. And I wanted it to be something that the horses enjoyed. So this was my choice, and figuring out what words to do first and how to introduce the words is like probably the hardest part of the communication buttons. Is like we want the horses to be able to consent and give permission and set their own boundaries, but at the same time, I need them to be able to work as well. So, what buttons are we going to choose? If I were to choose treats, and probably like be on the button, pushing the button every second, like treat, 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 treat. So figuring out words that is actually going to enhance the quality of the communication, especially when we're like trying to figure it out to begin with. And so these buttons also meant that there was emotional motivator and a positive reinforcer without there having to be treats involved. So we could reinforce the targeting of the buttons without having to involve treats, which is perfect. It like shows a nice pathway of consequence for them so that they can recognize that they're going to get something that they want from touching the buttons, and then they have the choice to choose whether they want scratches or whether they want hugs. But obviously, in introducing the words to the horses and the buttons to the horses, they need to firstly be able to target. And then secondly, we need them to experience what the button gets them. So if they're going to touch the hug button, they're going to get a hug. And if they're going to touch the scratches button, they're going to get scratches. So then this becomes a conversation of how can we hug our horse so that they enjoy it. And this might be like really easy for some of you who have a really good relationship with your horse. It's probably harder for people like me. I really don't do physical contact with horses well because I'm super allergic to them. So the the hugging is not something that I've ever really done with the horses because I don't want to get my face too close to them. I normally rely on scratching and finding where they like to be scratched as well. So for some people, and then for like the schoolies, their job is just to look after beginners and to look after their riders. They don't really have that job of creating emotional connections and relationships with their horses, with their people. There's like quite a more superficial relationship that happens with the horses in the riding school with the riders than there is when it's like your horse at home, and it's really that like one-to-one connection and relationship. Like that one-to-one relationship at home can really evolve into the kind of relationship that you would have with a family member, where boundaries can get really blurry and how you connect becomes really important because it has to be the way that horse likes connection. Whereas like in a school environment, it's almost like the level of connection is more like a friendship at best and like work at worst. So being with co-workers that you do like either like or you don't like. So how we kind of how deep we take the relationship is really going to be dependent on like what the environmental situation and circumstances look like. So obviously, like in this school environment, there can be a bit of a superficial relationship where the horses understand that their job is to look after the students, but they can kind of tune them out a little bit. Like part of being a good school horse is recognizing to tune most of what the riders are doing out and only listening to the clearest of cues, because beginner intermediate riders are pretty messy, and so if they reacted to and responded to everything that every rider said to them, they'd be utterly confused and stressed the whole time. So there's a certain level of tuning the rider out that happens for a good school horse. So figuring out like where we're going to kind of bring that together. One of the things that I have started doing with like my fresh beginners, after having a couple of students start that were actually like terrified to be on a horse and to be with the horses, is I get them to like put their arm under their neck and then like put their nose on the neck of the horse, and then the way that I explain it to them is I say, breathe the horse into your heart. So they close their eyes and they take a deep breath, and I go, can you breathe them deeper into your heart? And so what I'm looking for is like the horse to show some relaxation cues and the students to show some relaxation and confidence as well. And then we go into our walk. When I walk, stop. When I stop, back. When I back, exercise. And that's how I'm starting a lot of my first time riders these days. So we haven't been through that kind of work with my students that are like more advanced. Our groundwork is based on like cue training. We do talk about relaxation cues and that kind of thing, and connection and liberty-based connection and whatnot. But we haven't done that kind of like really deep connection work with them yet. So it was a really interesting thing to watch, putting the hug button out, and it's like hugging someone you don't know. Like the students are trying to figure out how to hug these horses. The horses are like, oh, this is a little bit too much contact, a little bit too physical, like too close for me. That you could see like the walls come straight up when the like older students are giving them a hug. And it's like, how do you get a horse to relax into you and to drop their boundaries and to go into you when you come into them? And that's what we're talking about. That's what we're looking at when we're looking at connection. Like the scratches are almost an easier kind of gateway, and that's why we also talk about the treat training being a gateway as well, is that if we can get the horses seeing us and seeing us in a positive viewpoint, then we can start bringing some walls down. And inevitably, as walls come down, we kind of have some behaviors that come up that need to be addressed. So it's like a back and forth of boundaries, connection, boundaries, connection, boundaries, connection. And as we bring a boundary down, as we bring a wall down, we may need to set a boundary to ensure that the behavior stays safe, but then we want to reconnect and make sure that the relationship is still there as well. And so when we go in for that hug, like that's obviously a deeper level of connection. We gotta, like the way that I explain it to my students is like, how does this horse fit into your heart? And you gotta like kind of make sure that you're fully, you're not embracing them physically, you're embracing them with your heart as well, and making sure that you're inviting the horse into you to care about them. I think that is a really important thing. Like, it's something that we do with our horses that we own. We care for them and we care about them. But then when we have like horses in this more mechanical environment of like they're just here to be ridden, you can lose a bit of that quality of heart that you want to bring to the relationship. So anyway, we're talking about how to hug your horse so that they enjoy it. So I'd be really interested for you guys, like, let me know how you're hugging with your horses. I know one of my students, she expects both of her horses to hug her before they go to their dinner. And I think that's super cute. Like, we're setting expectations and boundaries with our horses, but from a place of connection. And when you do this well, like the horses, they do relax into you and they do open up and let you in. So I was explaining this with one of our horses yesterday, where she was, really struggling to, she's got really strong walls. She's a very strong girl. She knows her job is to look after the riders. She's a really good horse. But she's the one that, I've been working pretty hard on bringing walls down so that she actually relaxes. And so bringing the horse down so that we can kind of tap into her heart there is like even further than just relaxing. So you can see her like, and you can see it in the horses that they're like, oh, their whole body kind of tenses and braces as you go to touch them. And you really just want them to be like actually enjoying that touch, and you want them to relax into it. So one of the conversations we were having was that, as humans in the horse-human relationship, we are pretty much always in the position of power. So, even if you're not necessarily in the position of power with handling your horse, if you've got a really big horse that is pushing you around and being silly and whatnot, you are in the position of power with what actually happens to the horse. So where they live, what kind of conditions they live in, when they're fed, how they're fed, what they're fed. So without like physically controlling the horse, we are still physically controlling every aspect of their life and what happens to them. So it's really important that we recognize this position of power with our horses. And the better we get at being assertive and asserting our will onto the horses, the more we have to kind of like take that step back and make sure the permission and the consent is there, and that they actually are willing and not doing it because we say so. And we've just gotten really good at being assertive and kind of making things happen. So this is really challenging, and it can be the friction, it can be the wedge between the horse and the rider, is that the more assertive and effective you get at telling the horse what to do, the more as a rider you can think that just like leaning on assertiveness and leaning on more pressure and asserting your will more on the horse is how to make them do things. But really it's like the quality of relationship that you have to recognize that your horse is communicating with you, how you're going to work with your horse to motivate it, what motivates them, what do they enjoy. And so it's such a simple exercise as scratches and hugs was so amazing to see, because each horse is going to be an individual in where they like to be scratched, how they like to be scratched, where and how they like to be hugged. And each human and trainer and whatnot that's working with the horses is going to have a different interpretation of how to scratch them and how to hug them. So this is like that really precious moment that we're all looking for with our horses, like that unicorn moment. How do we come together in what we're working towards with our horses? So, if I'm asking my horse to walk on, like, 2 legs kick means go. But adapting it to create a motivation from the horse that creates willingness, and the horse wants to seek working with you and enjoys it and enjoys their time together, that's where the magic lies. So like hugging a horse, just embracing them, wrapping your arms around them, and their whole body tenses and they freeze and they won't move, that is, where you've missed the cue, you've missed the communication from the horse. The horse hasn't invited you into that embrace. So working on the horse to create, a relationship with them where they're going to invite you into that embrace is part of getting to know that horse, what it likes, what it doesn't like, and how to kind of come together. And the same with the scratches. Like the scratches are always a lot easier to tell because they'll like move you around and move around underneath you to get to the point of where they want you to scratch. And if you're scratching too hard, they'll kind of shift away. If you're not scratching hard enough, they'll lean more into you. So like, I guess the scratching is like entry level, heart opening kind of exercise. And then so it's being able to recognize. Now, this has 2 flow-on effects, right? Is like the horses aren't going to choose the hug button if they don't enjoy the hug they're getting. So we don't have a positive reinforcer in that moment if they don't want to be hugged or they don't want to be hugged the way they're being hugged. Same with the scratching. If they don't want to be scratched, they don't like the way they've been scratched, they're not going to choose the scratches button. So to actually make the buttons work, we need to be able to find a level of connection with the horse where they actually enjoy the hugs and they actually enjoy the scratches, so that they're going to push the buttons to get the hugs and the scratches. So that's like, trainer brain there is like, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get the horses to touch the buttons to communicate whether they want a hug or a scratch. For them to touch the button to choose a hug or a scratch, they need to actually have a positive reinforcer to touch the button, so they actually have to enjoy the hug or the scratch. So that's like our training brain, and that's what we're like taking across. Like that's what we're talking about in every exercise that we do with our horse, like lunging, tacking up, riding, whatever it is. We're always like, where is the behavior that we need to mark? What is our reinforcer going to be, and how do we guide our horse into that behavior? That is our training brain. But when we're talking about like quality of connection, it's really about identifying that individual and unique horse opinion about how they actually want to be handled and worked with. And the more assertive you get, the less you listen to their opinion of how they want you to do things. So it's not it can just even be sometimes that they're not wanting to do what you're asked. They're just not wanting to do what you're asked because of the way that you asked them. And like an example of that is with the backup with that natural horsemanship technique of like wiggling the lead. Absolute pet peeve of mine, because it's so rude to the horses to like wiggle the rope in their face like that, and most of them take offense to it. And our horses that need it, it's completely ineffective for, because they do take offense to it because it is rude. And the horses that don't need it, we're just being rude to and breaking the connection. So it's like, how can we communicate to our horse to ask them to back up? You don't need to be shaking a lead in their face to get it. There's plenty of ways that we can ask them to back up in a way that is polite, that we are respectful of them, and they can actually set boundaries with us and how we interact with them. So it's like what I'm trying to say here is that we have our training brain where things are like black and white, like here's how I'm going to guide the behavior, here's how I'm going to mark the behavior, here's how I'm going to reinforce the behavior. But then we have to take into account that every horse is a unique individual, and they're going to respond to the way that we ask, completely dependent on their personality, their experiences, their environment, and all the rest of it. So I thought that was a pretty fun and interesting and enlightening experience. So at the school for the next couple of weeks, I think a lot of my students are learning how to hug. Sorry, guys. But for the rest of you that we're not doing this work face-to-face, I'd love to know what you think about it, and like if you implement it and how you go. We're seeing some like fun body language cues from the horses. When I kind of took over that position with Angel to get that hug with her, being in a position of power with her, the first thing that she did when I went to hug her was to back out of my space. And so I had to say, no, it's okay. Like, I'm not asking you out of my space. I'm not asking you to back up. I'm asking for this connection. And so I actually had to squat down with her and put myself in a more submissive stance around her, because she's also quite short, for her to kind of like take a breath and relax. And then when we got that, then I just stood up, and that's when she started coming into my space and wanting to kind of like cuddle up next to me. So there's a lot of different kind of ways that you will go about approaching how you're going to get the horse to invite you into their space. So it'll be really interesting to see what you guys come up with, the different, scenarios that you end up in because of this exercise. I'd really love to know your feedback on it. Thanks for listening. I will catch you in the next one. Bye.